Today's topic is burnout and reinvention. I'm speaking with Amber Posey, a trained family and mental health nurse practitioner and psychotherapist who experienced burnout herself. She now supports entrepreneurs, creatives, visionary women, and helping professionals move into more presence-oriented living without the hustle-focused and performative anxieties that are zapping their strengths and well-being. Welcome, Amber.
Hey, thank you for that. I loved hearing your little quick bio of me. That was cute. Because yeah, that zapping of energy, I think it's just everywhere right now.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. So you shared with me before that you experienced burnout as a psychotherapist in private practice. And I find it interesting because private practice, so, one imagines that you are your own person, you are self-employed, and yet that happened. But at the same time, I know it's very common because I work with other psychotherapists, and this is actually one of the most common reasons why they leave the profession, even sadly
Yeah.
sometimes. So would you mind sharing a bit about your story?
Yeah, and like you said, it's a kind of an enigma, right? When you're self-employed. And what I often say is you start realizing you're your own captor when you're self-employed. And generally, entrepreneurs are very freedom focused. We generally like freedom. We like, setting our own schedule, setting our own income capacity, all the things. And so I was very freedom drawn. I felt like I was helping clients become more, freedom focused. And I worked with eating disorders primarily, which is a restrictive disease model. Typically, right? You have like a restriction and then sometimes an overindulgence if there's a binge, and then if there's also in the anorexia model, it's still maintaining restriction, right? So I'm helping people get into their bodies and live a life that's more freedom based. And the relationship to food, the relationship to other relationships, there's all these intricate things. So I feel like I'm very well prepared to understand how this works. I'm setting up a business so I'm not burned out, and then I burn out. Now, throughout this time frame, I think what was also happening and what I like to really talk about is there's burnout, there's what's a misnomer is compassion fatigue. It's really an empathy struggle because compassion doesn't actually burn you out. Empathy is a very important attribute as humans. We need to have empathy. And generally, when you're a sensitive person and you work in healing professions, there's this term empath, right? That you have an empathetic capacity. And that's why we have to have boundaries as helping professionals. Compassion actually gives you boundaries in a way that empathy, if you are kind of very in tune with feelings, you can sometimes get flooded in a different way. So we are taught, psychotherapists particularly, but all healthcare professionals are really taught about using empathy and then having boundaries. So mental health is becoming less stigmatized, right? So that's really good. But it's also a lot of feelings, emotions being flooded into you. So if you don't think about compassion as the primary principle, which is suffering with, they both can feel kind of hard, but you're present with suffering versus sitting in the same shoes and then not being able to kind of, whose feeling is this? So again, generally psychotherapists are really aware of this. We talk about something called transference and countertransference. If you're a psychotherapist, you're taught to have supervising relationships so that you can be clear about your healing, your injuries. You're not naming the client as the problem. You're also aware of your own struggles. And so I felt like I was really not just like knowledgeable about it, but I actually was living a pretty wise life with this. And so being burned out felt really hard for me. And I think as I've really explored this in the last 5 years, what I would say is I was really having some moral injury slash really like an existential grief about the profession, about the way the world's being healthcare is right now. And I think the easy thing for me was to say it was burnout because it felt less big to talk about. And as a psychotherapist, I think I had a lot of shame that I had all these skills and this knowledge, and I was not necessarily applying it for myself as effectively, even though I was seeing my own therapist and a psychotherapist who I'd seen forever, like as my supervisor. So I felt like I just had a lot of processing. And my thoughts are really that we are in existential grief as humans. I've been in practice for about 20 years. And if you are sensitive and you feel like you're also kind of taking on maybe too much responsibility for patients or clients, you are drawn to the profession and the discipline, not the industry. And you can be very profitable working as a professional in a discipline. It doesn't mean that there's not a profit. It's just that there is a certain core value. And I think we're in such an upheaval with the disciplines being controlled by industries that I think if you're sensitive to that, plus you're dealing with people's pain, you're dealing with vicarious trauma, no matter what your specialty is, you just have high risk. And we're really transforming the way healthcare is. I mean, that's part of what your business is, right? It's learning how to transform it in a healthy way while you're still mentally or in your own trauma stuck in what once was, right? And so it's really kind of, it's a grief process to say like, okay, well then what is it that I'm going to create? And that's why I like to talk about moving from that to reviving, rebirthing into more what I call is your soul call versus your roll call. Especially if you're a clinical professional, you get brought in, you get reshaped to lose some of your individuality to create that collective part of what it means to be a healer, which is really important, which helps you not be discriminatory. It helps you to not have prejudice. Then you're trying to like put your own self back into it. So, because as a healer, you're using yourself, not just your knowledge. And there's this, again, push-pull. Then there's the industry of people who are not clinically trained, who think that they can work on trauma more than those of us who are, there's like all this stuff happening. And so it's just really, again, an upheaval, a reckoning, and then putting it all together and finding your mission in a new way that's informed by your education, it's informed by your training, but it does have to be done differently. And I think I just it was a lot of navigating, a lot of obstacles and bumps. I had a sense of like, I worked this hard to get here. There's the golden handcuffs when you're thinking about leaving something where you're like, well, I'm making good money. Can I leave? I mean, that's really strong with people who are in a lot of debt from their education still, because some people are burning out 3-4 years in as being physicians. They have $300,000 of debt. They're burning out within 5 years, sometimes the first year of going into clinical practice. And so that's a huge amount of time and energy to say, like, I'm done.
So what you mentioned about having certain values and then the reality of the profession or the situation, it reminds me of cognitive dissonance. And that's basically, isn't it a form of cognitive dissonance that we want to achieve some standards, certain objectives, and not able because of these limitations in the
Yes, definitely.
specific situations? What did you notice first? What were your so-called symptoms of burnout that you noticed?
Yeah. So I tended to have long-term psychotherapy. I do more psychodynamic work, obviously using neuroscience components, and I believe in relational work. So when someone has relational trauma, which is what most of us have as humans, in order to get better, you have to reestablish healthy relationships, and that starts also with a therapist for like modeling behaviors of what that feels like. So I'm doing long-term work with people. And so my first symptom was I did not want new clients. Like I was like, I don't want new people in my life. Like I have zero room. I never had a sense of not wanting to work with current clients, but it was definitely like, I don't have like the capacity for taking on new clients, particularly in say a crisis model. So there's like the crisis, moving them into basic functioning and then hoping to move them into thriving. I was really always I enjoyed that initially, but then I started noticing as my career was moving forward that I liked survival to thriving. So I was working with different layers of clients, right? You'd have some that were in the crisis, some that were in surviving, some that were moving into thriving or staying and helping them maintain that. And so I realized like, okay, I do not have room for this. And also I started noticing I was less satisfied with the medical parts. I was doing psychotherapy, but as my main modality, but I am an integrative nurse practitioner. So I would do prescribe medicines as needed. some people I had that weren't therapy clients, they were just medication management. And though I did 30-minute appointments so I could do some brief therapy with them, I noticed I didn't want to do that anymore. I was like, okay, I only want to do the clients that I'm doing therapy with. Then there was more of a sense of pharmaceuticals. I was like, oh, I have less of an interest in pharmaceuticals. So there was just like less interest, which I don't think that was necessarily burnout, the less interest. It was maybe pointing me one way. But it did start feeling like, well, what am I going to do? Like, this is part of your model. And I started feeling angry. That was one of the things. I think I'm probably naturally, I can get angry more than I can get sad as a faster response for me. So I felt angry more than I felt sad. And I think for us as healers, particularly, helplessness is a pretty bad feeling. And if you're a helper, you typically like to help and you don't identify with helplessness. And so I didn't feel helpless. I felt annoyed and angry because I think underneath it all, there was a helplessness of like, because this was starting during COVID. Everybody felt like they were getting thrown into a crisis. So like all my clients who were doing well, food was being scarce. So I knew that a lot of my clients who had worked with food issues were going to get exposed to some of the fears that were part of their initial diagnosis. And so I thought like, oh my gosh, whatever. So everyone's kind of getting pulled into a trauma response and a lot less functioning. And so it felt like you're working with everybody at a crisis level. Therapists were burning out, physicians were burning out, nurses were burning out, every healthcare provider, right? The hospitals. And then I had a sense of, I was comparing myself to the colleagues who were in the system more so. So though I was, I think if you work in healthcare, you're in the system, but I wasn't being told, come in at certain times, right? I could do things from telehealth. I had a lot of freedom. So I felt bad that I felt burned out when I had a lot of privilege compared to my colleagues who were employed. So again, I think there was a part of me that was like shaming myself for my own lived experience versus, which again, you don't do that with clients. You know that their feelings are valid and real.
That's almost like a form of survival guilt. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This sense of, and again, like shaming myself for my own experience in comparison, right? Comparison is a trap. It never makes you happy. And so I felt like I didn't want to vocalize my feelings. I noticed withdrawal from like identification with the larger collective of helpers as well as humanity. I was getting a little isolated, I noticed. Loss of energy. Yeah, just kind of again, that doom and gloom of a depressive state where you start seeing the tunnel vision versus that more expansive view. And it felt very contrary. I think I'm naturally very optimistic. I love envisioning. I love the future concepts of what's possible. And so I thought like, I'm dealing with depressive symptoms. I felt like anxiety was more of a similar, I understood anxiety well, those symptoms, but I was feeling depressed, not even enjoying people, which is definitely the type of work I like. Client work. That's my favorite work is client work. So I was like, this is just not me. I'm 47. So it was also, I think midlife in itself does something to you. And then women, we were dealing with hormonal changes at that time. So I think that was also involved. I do believe your midlife is kind of that point where you typically have especially when you work with high achievers, which I tended to, you hit these points that you've created the career that you want. And so though I may not have been like the most successful in the healthcare field of what other people do, for me, I created exactly what I wanted. I wanted a private practice that I worked, healthy hours, that was lifestyle based versus just working all of the time. And so I had hit my achievement that I wanted. Definitely like you're up on your peak and you're looking down like, oh, this is not what I really want. So I think that does happen in midlife in general, especially in our culture. We don't have the wisdom cultures, losing that adolescence energy actually in your early, adolescence, early 20s. I think a lot of us are in like stagnated adolescence. And so we're very stuck on the climb, that hero's journey that we all have. And I like to talk about the heroine's journey, which is more of your inner work, doesn't matter what gender. Your inner journey is really important. And so though I obviously understand that and believe that as a therapist, I think I still was a little attached to, the ascent, the accomplishment, the achievement, because of that natural part of us that we all need safety and security. And I think we often outsource it to outside of ourselves to establish that at first, and then we again get attached to what created the safety and security versus, your truer self is what's actually creating the safety and security.
So it sounds like it wasn't even related very strongly to what you were doing or the types of patients that you were seeing. It was more like larger issues. And I can relate very, very well to what you were saying about the midlife. I had a very similar period also in my mid-40s when I made very similar story. Actually, I made a huge career change, and previously I was not self-employed. So I had just businesses on the side, but my main
Yeah.
job was an employment at a faculty position in a medical school doing research that
Yeah.
I loved, but I just reached a point when it was, it became very repetitive. And so all those different things, including what concerns women, in midlife and still hanging on to the more youthful like energy, and
Yeah.
we want to resolve. So I constantly was thinking that I need to figure out what happened, why I
Yeah.
kind of declined, and instead of seeing it as a possibility. So it's not necessarily a decline, but just a
No, no, no.
and the challenge is to figure out how to change it, and instead of going back.
Again, I think it's just, again, I think when you, the reason why I like to support helping professionals, academic or not, there's this concept of, problem solution, right? And you feel a sense of empowerment when you help people with healing and helping people. And so generally there's this concept of the wounded healer. I'm sure you've probably talked about it, right? That wounded healer often doesn't think they're hopeless. And being a human means you're going to have moments of helplessness. Being a human means you have moments of dependence. And our culture, especially Western culture, is so independent oriented. And as a psychotherapist, I would always talk about healthy independence, healthy interdependence.
Yeah.
And I knew that we all had levels of dependence that, you have it when you're young, you have it when you're sick, and you have it when you're older at times. But when you're obsessed with youth culture, you don't think you have it, right? And so you tend to have in the codependent world, right, this idea of obsessive independence really is a codependent behavior where you're pretending you are an island and you're not, right? You have to have relationships. And I think when you're a helper, you're so used to leading health and change. And generally the people who have the most humility are the people who've gone through something where they've needed to be helped. And so I think we all have been helped, but maybe when we haven't been helped with like that Achilles heel. So for me, it felt like a really strong dark night of the soul. I felt like I had had one before, a pretty strong one in my life. And then remembering too that when you're going through these stages, your previous traumas or wounds that get pretty healed, there's still usually a little scar tissue, right? So when you're in another dark night of the soul, it's kind of brought to the surface to really truly heal it. So I felt like I was like looking at early life experience. I went through a divorce that felt not traumatizing, but it was a big change for my life. That some of that stuff kind of came back up. Like, have I healed some of those parts of me that I thought I really had? And then because my career was the one thing that was like a really steady force for me most of my life, like I think I had to really look at my relationship to career that substituted some of my struggles from my youth and some of my substitutes for relationship pain. That was like, oh, that's the one thing that's like the anchor. And so changing your relationship to your career when you are very career identified is tough. And my belief of good therapy is that you're working with people's healthy egos to support a healthy ego, which has to have some identity. But in the end, you really have to learn how to disidentify with so many of your identities so that you're really feeling the unity of what it means to be a human, which is there's suffering and there is joy, there is pleasure and there is pain. And I think what can happen is sometimes when we are achievement oriented and we're healthcare or helping professionals, we can sometimes get caught in this idea that we'll be exempt from pain because we understand it. And I think that however we learn that lesson, it can be easy, it can be hard. Mine was a little bit of a struggle. You have to remember that like pain is not punishment. Pain is not, you're never going to be exempt from it, but you don't have to suffer. But generally there is suffering in that you can talk about it till you're blue in the face, but if you haven't sometimes physically felt what it feels like to be knocked upon your knees into feeling your pain, again, you know this, you're a neuroscientist, right? We avoid pain. That's what an organism does. We do not want to feel pain, but we create so much more suffering because we're so pain avoidant, right? Instead of like, pain is, it can be felt and expressed, and it will, like a wave of, it won't last forever, but we tend to think it will.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the biggest challenges of midlife, usually midlife, for people to figure this out because, as we discussed, when we are young, it's also biological programming that we feel invincible when we are young. It serves survival, it serves
Yeah,
reproduction and evolution in many
yeah,
ways. Then we, because we have to face all those things that cause suffering in life, and we reach midlife, and then we start to. There is a point that we can't escape, and then
yeah.
people resolve it in different ways, or they
Or
don't.
don't.
For
Yeah,
example, my initial solution was that I started using substances. That's the whole, how objectively
yeah,
recovery was born also. That my own, I compensated with addictive behaviors and substances because, as you said, that trying to avoid that
yeah,
pain and the reality, and just escaping. And then at some point, I think we reach a point, many of us, that we can't just deny the truth
yeah.
anymore. So what was your point, your turning point? Was there like a discrete turning point, or was it more a gradual process?
Well, I think even now I'm still changing. Speaking of no escape, I want to just mention a book called The Wisdom of No Escape by Pema Chodron. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's really good. She's a Buddhist, but it's a brief book, and it's just a couple of her lectures. But I do really think it's really an important concept, right? Is that you don't shame the part of you that wants to escape. And there is so much wisdom in what's happening, where you just learn how to that concept of truly surrender, right? And that's needed in recovery from everything, is just surrendering to reality, having so much compassion in that space, self-compassion and compassion from whoever's your helper. If there's any sense of pushing people through that, it's going to backfire. It's really just compassion for the human condition. And that, if you can hold that, it does start creating like the entrance into to get out of your suffering, right? And so the light starts kind of shining. It's just really tough, and depending on if there is, what you use to escape, it can be obviously harder, where you may need more and more support if there's substance, for example. Or humans have addictive behaviors, and to think that some people are the addicts but others aren't is to shame people about addiction. Is a very biological, makes a lot of sense of what people are doing, right? They're trying to problem solve, and it's just turning against yourself.
Yeah, because after a while, I think it's addiction specifically. It's kind of self-destructive behavior. Whether you want to
Yeah,
call it or not, that's the truth of it, I think. And we blame because in the beginning, very often people project it outward, and they kind of blame others, the conditions, and other people, and so on. But at some point, we cannot deny our own role, and that
yeah,
create this kind of self-blame, and that's very easy. So you are very right, I completely agree with you. That was part of my issue, and part of this getting stuck in these mental health issues, addiction, depression, and so on, is because we keep it in secret. And even I remember I was going to part of my when I was trying to find solutions for myself during that time. I was in therapy. I went to therapy, and I tried different therapies because I was not satisfied. And then I only figured out later on that how the therapist tried to help, but I was just not, I was not
yeah,
open to being helped. Basically doing even more of the same things in secret, and
yeah.
just performing for them. And
Secrecy breeds all of these things. And I think so, partially me talking about burnout is to, that was part of, like, I was like, okay, that is part of your gift that you need to do, is to, you have to work with one safe other to share first, and then it can be easier if you decide to share. And not everybody needs to share, but I feel like it is, I like to share because I was self-employed, because I had a burnout prevention model career. Like I knew about burnout and I was like, I will not burn out. I will have, I'm going to create a career around not burning out. And then I did. So yeah, for me, I think it was gradual. I think what happened was I was like, okay, I'm going to leave from anger. I was like, I'm going to leave healthcare. And I think from anger, I was also, I can transform healthcare. And so there was like seeing that part and having some distance where I was like, okay, you're not going to be transforming anything from anger. You're just going to create more problems. I think the one thing about when you are self-employed, you can create time and space differently than when you're employed. I'm going to have some pausing. I was willing to let myself have financial implication changes where I thought like, if I need to lose money, I'm going to lose money because I'm not going to die so that I can save my pride. Like I don't, and if that means there's financial problems, I don't care. Like I felt like it was like a hell or high water. I'm going to change my life.
Yeah.
I think I got distracted down that where I was like, oh, I can change my business while I'm doing that. Like there was that, I still was tied to the entrepreneur that was like, oh, everything can become a business model. So I think I was trying to do coaching, and then I really stopped even the concept of coaching, and I really do stay with guide work is what I say I do. But I was like, oh, I can just like transform this into this, and I can help other helpers, and like as they build more freedom-based careers. And so I think I got a little bit sidetracked initially, again, trying to avoid grief. And achievers think compassion is kind of being a sissy sometimes. Like they're like, I don't need pity. And I'm like, no, this is not pity. Like really like learning the difference between pity and compassion is really important, I think, for people too. I go to this idea of, usually you're functioning out of fear, and your next thing to move out of fear is to be in a more desire-based. But in the end, desire is just a stepping stone, because if you're just desire, this too with addiction, if you're just desire-based, you can also make all kinds of excuses for following desire, which is the same as following fear. So you and I met through this idea of a loving organization. We both believe that healthy love, with that, whatever that means to each people, is the foundation of change, right? So love of self, love of others. Professions have over the years kind of moved out of heal the healer and the relationship part into just problem solution model, which gets tied to fear. And if you don't have time and space with clients or patients, you're going to be a fear-based provider versus a loving-based as your discipline. As a therapist, we're taught to get supervision for the rest of our lives when we work. It's not supervision from your boss. It's supervision. You find a therapist that has more experience than you, and you commit to the relationship of looking at your own problems so that you're not identifying problems as the client or whatever, right? And so I think more healthcare providers, not just therapists, need to have mentorships. They need to have healthy supervision. But we're losing the field of the elders, because those of us who are in midlife should be taking on the mantle of being an elder. But we've all gotten, if we've stayed, we've all gotten burned out. And then we're like, okay, how am I going to transition this? So I think there's a lot that has to be changed. And if we get too overwhelmed with like the how before we really understand the why, I think that starts getting people overwhelmed too. So one of the things that I really like to talk about is envisioning processes, because when you envision, you can hold on to a vision a little bit better than you can hold on to a goal, because goals have to be really flexible and change. And so it's that both end. It's the bigger vision, the bigger call. Again, I call it the soul call, along with the practicality, and then having the people in your life that support you to do that. Because when you are going to do visionary changes, you have to kind of have a sense of, you need friends, you need family, you need people who are mentors, and then you're going to have a lot of naysayers. There's a lot of naysayers who are like, yeah, but what about this and what about this? And you have to be able to have healthy groups of people who believe with you in the vision, so that you are kind of moving through those obstacles in a way that you can really sustain the vision if we're going to make some changes.
On the envisioning, I think it's especially for those of us who are entrepreneurial. We actually, it's programmed in us almost, like we love, envisioning and, creating visions. And I guess what can happen is that if we continue doing the same type of thing for a while, for a few years, we lose a sense of novelty, and
Yeah.
we don't have as much room for new visions. And I experienced the same. I was in research or studying the causes of mental
Yeah.
health problems. I moved
Yeah.
even my research field, changed my research field several times, just due to that, just to be able to study a different problem and solve
Yeah.
different problems. So different businesses focused on different problems. So what became your new vision after your?
So I worked for almost 20 years in traditional healthcare. And again, I had kind of felt like I could do that for the rest of my life because I feel like each client is novel. So that helped me with the novelty part of me. Like every session, even with the same client, has a novel energy. And so I believe that still. But I also realized that for me to serve best was actually to leave traditional healthcare because once I do see a problem, I'm a little too vocal to actually be somebody who can fix from within. I think there's a part of me that I can't swallow too much BS. And there's a lot of BS that's happening. So I was like, okay, you have to be prepared to leave the traditional role. Therapy and healthcare in general do need to kind of go back to their roots in a certain way because we're going to end up having a bunch of teaching people how to become isolated islands instead of how to actually become more human. I have a big heart towards healthcare. It's a right to me. It's not a want. It is a right. It is a need. Every human will be exposed to education and every human will be exposed to healthcare. So those two fields are very important to me because they are both falling apart. So I've always worked again with high achievers. Eating disorders often are very high achievers.
I know I had one when I was young. I had that problem with so much like wanting to be independent and so I didn't even seek help. So
so they're really good at high achievement, but they're not in touch with their bodies as much, right? I like a good high achiever. I like an entrepreneur because they do have the capacity to take risks. And I'm really good at supporting people to become compassionate and creative. I have the Creative RX, this idea of you have to be, in order to have courage, you have to have compassion and creativity. If you don't have those two, courage is important. Fearlessness can be reckless, right? So you actually need courage to face, we all have fears. Fear in itself is not a problem. It's more of like, who am I? And if you're compassionate, if you're creative, if you are curious, if you are centered, you can do a lot if you have some community. It's hard to do that because people want to blend in or they want to stand out instead of that harmony of doing both, right? You have to be willing to be unique, not special, but unique. And you have to be willing to kind of work within the community of humans. And otherwise, you're a lone wolf, or you're just kind of blending in and you're not actually in like branding speak. You're blending in, you're not setting yourself apart, right? So I always have liked working with women. So I say visionary women. And again, everybody can be a visionary. People think it's like a special. We all have visionary capacity. Not everybody follows through with their visionary capacity, but everybody is actually a visionary. Entrepreneurs generally are people who do that. And then helping professionals, because I do think we're in a space of, we could lose like brain drain, and not everybody has to leave healthcare or academics. Some people are like really drawn to it, but they need people who are being real with them, not just like sugarcoating like some mindfulness or some like self-care. Like again, there's a lot of BS that happens, right? I'm not a big fan of like a coaching model only because coaching says like it does a lot of action without sometimes really being clear about why a therapeutic understanding is important. Is you have to understand your why. You have to understand how you got here. And then, yes, you can always be action-based, but trying to force people to be action-based when they're in trauma responses is re-traumatizing humans. And a lot of entrepreneurs are very good at like risk. But again, risk-taking can be trauma-based, right? So you have to have enough nuance to be like, actually, I need you to slow down versus somebody who's more avoidant. And then what I noticed for me is I was very action oriented, and then I got very avoidant. Yeah. But if I would have gotten into action just for action's sake, I would have bypassed what I needed to actually learn, which is to learn how to slow down. And that I am not my actions, I am not my activity, I am not my career. And so again, it's like really pulling the bigger I out of your actions so that when you are in alignment, your vision can really take place for the next part of your life. And it's a centered present vision versus a productive, performative. Again, nothing wrong with performance, nothing wrong with productivity, but our hustle culture is thinking that you're gonna like save up all your riches and you're gonna die an unhappy person, right? And that's if there's any point to living, it is to really be alive in your body, feel yourself, feel sensations, and know that they don't define you and they don't kill you, but they sort of make you feel that way if you're not able to be in your body. So an embodiment component is really important. And I think creativity is one of the best ways to get into your body. Again, high achievers start making it about like being the best at meditating and being the best. So like anything that makes people not be perfect is really good. So creativity is like mess it up and allow the creative process. To me, the creative process is very much like the therapeutic process. And it helps you start tapping into intuition and into your strengths that are before they're verbalized and before they're just your skill set, that you can start really trusting yourself more. And self-trust helps you have trust with others, which helps you find the collaborations and the people that are really, here to support you.
I think even human intelligence, we tend to, just because we have intelligence, we tend to focus on like so-called higher goals. So I think many people are familiar with Maslow's pyramid, this old concept. I think I like it. It's very old, but I like it because I think it's very, it summarizes human needs. It's basically just everything all in one pack of concepts. And we tend to strive for, the top self-actualization, but very often this is very much what happened to me when I was young, but I was completely unaware of it. I basically completely denied my basic needs, and mentioned that denying the need of the body and rest and health and all that, just because I want to
that's spiritual seeking, chasing.
Yeah, exactly, and chasing those goals. And I think, and some people do the other way around, but I think this is if you work with high achievers, I think this is a very, very, very typical.
Yeah, it's almost always an issue because high achievement, and I can just give you this concept in anorexia versus bulimia. So they both are restrictive, but anorexia, the idea is you're ascent oriented, you're into like the spirit and avoiding the body, and bulimia is like going down into the earth and like grounding in, so they like fill themselves up. And the idea is we need harmony, right? So the aesthetic of like anorexia, right, this like ideal, this thin, this perfect, this purity, that kind of purity culture is part of most of Western traditions, where it's, and even some Eastern ones too, right? And so I'm a big fan of, there is spiritual needs for sure, but if you avoid the body to get to a spiritual need, you've cut off all of your humanity. And like, I'm just not here to teach that. Like I believe in desire, like teaching women to claim their desires versus their intellect, right? It's very important at first, because especially if you're into, say, spiritual states, but you can feel this concept of bliss in your body. So avoiding your body takes away that capacity of really the sensation of awe and wonder, what we would say are spiritual states. You feel it through your body. It's not just a mind concept, right? And even the obsession right now with like psychedelics, there's always this idea of like trying to get outside of things that humans just struggle with. So I'm a big fan of like, you got to get in your body before you can get anywhere, because that's the vessel to create, right? And it's really important. And again, why I like to talk about desire, because again, I know desire is a step, and then this idea of like, now what? The mind and the body, everything is connected. And to pretend that it's not is silly, but sometimes you have to break things apart to understand. And so again, that nuance that each person needs, right? So some people, too much spiritual talk would be a problem for them, and so you're going to give them your body. And other people, they're not even aware of their spiritual needs, right? And so it's, again, like anything, you want to have nuance and you want to have customized approaches.
And I think you don't even need to be spiritual per se, like by
Yeah.
spiritual meaning that, believing in some, higher
Yeah.
power,
Yeah.
this esoteric meaning of spirituality. For example, I've never been a super spiritual person, but simply just by curiosity and
Yeah.
wanting to try different things and even intellectual curiosity and just chasing those goals and denying the needs of body. Eating disorder progression, I feel that's a very good example of what can happen. For example, in my case, you mentioned anorexia and bulimia. So I had both, but there was a
Yeah.
progression. And I think I'm sure you know this very well, that many
Yeah.
people experience both. Like it's
Yeah.
my case was first mine was first anorexia. That's what
Yeah.
developed first, and then bulimia. And
Mhm.
bulimia lasted longer because
Yeah.
it's just, more sustainable
Sustainable.
in the long run. But what I figured out later is that part of the reason why this switch happened is that because during the anorexia there is so much denial, like with the stars, just chasing this perfect image
Yeah.
and whatever we chase, even if it's just simply the body image,
Yeah.
wanting to be thin. And then there is no way to deny the body. The body will, make itself known. And I
Yep.
think that's exactly what I experienced. I started to have these intense cravings, then, denying food, and then intense
Yeah.
cravings for food, and then compensating, losing control, and the
Yeah.
binges, and then figuring out that you can, compensate for it with purging and
Yeah.
things, and so that's what happened. And then I even when I kind of felt that I resolved the eating disorder, I had a few years when I felt healthy and I didn't have
Mhm.
many problems, but then I developed the substance use issue.
Yeah. And
And
substance use can sometimes put you in
very
eating
much
disorder.
driven by a lot of the same things, because
No, they're
and my
totally
escape suddenly wasn't, related to food. It was related to, another compensating for
compensated. Yeah.
needs, emotional needs, and wanting to create for myself a state that I don't feel the anxiety,
Yeah.
self work, and all that. If I have to pick one critical thing that had to be part of my early recovery, was more, getting in touch with my body. The second one is also realizing my human nature and human limitations,
Of
because
course.
there
Which
is
is
so much.
being in touch with your body.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about entrepreneurship, and I think very much, entrepreneurs, we have this like natural, with the big visionaries
Yeah.
thinking. That's very exciting, and so we can get carried away thinking that there is no limit. There are no limits in the entrepreneurial culture. I find even now with all the awareness on mental health, people tend to encourage thinking that we have no limits. There is,
I
you
know.
have to, because we have to basically go through walls. I work with as an entrepreneur, but I work with investors. Those people are some of the most common sources of this suggestion and advisor.
Mhm.
They do advisory, saying that we have to have a form of delusional confidence.
It's like, again, I tend to say the word harmony more than balance, because you have to have a harmony in your life. And so you have to be boundless in some ways, but you're bounded. It's the same idea of boundaries in working with people. When you teach children, you want to give them limits and boundaries so they can feel free to explore. So all this is about attachment, right? Attachment model is, because I'm safe and secure, mom's here or dad's here, I can go and check out the world and I can kind of come back. So your humanity is your safety net. Like, you have to stay with your humanity, or you get into a delusional godlike thing, which, like a hypomania. Entrepreneurship is like a healthy way to sublimate some of this like godlike concept of like, I can create anything. But because we're human, we're going to do things out of balance, out of harmony at first. So we might get too tied to like thinking we're invincible. And because money can be created out of nothing, that's why that tends to be fun in some ways. But anything can become your God, right? You can be worshiping and attached to anything. And so part of a healthy human is like learning how to let go and not make things become your God that are just other humans are making, right? You don't want career, you don't want your money, you don't want your business, you don't want your partner to be who you worship. You want to look at what is the bigger point. We all have different needs when that comes in our lives, but we do encourage consumerism, materialism, things that will give you they say a godlike hole, right? Like it's a hole that will never get filled by the limitless concept of visionary. So again, every human has a visionary capacity. Some of us will use it more in like creating something. Entrepreneurship, I think, is a great way to, if you like novelty, if you like risk taking, but entrepreneurs have very bad mental health struggles. My final part of like my burnout was like, oh, I'm attached to the entrepreneur more than I'm attached to anything, because I was like, okay, I can let go of this, I can let go of that. But part of like, I drove myself into more expenses and things because I was like, okay, I got to transition this into this, and I don't have any time to slow down. As if like I'm on some clock about what life is really about. And like, again, pulling out of pressure culture, performative culture is really important if you actually want to have healthy visionary concepts. You have to be willing to have time and space. And that to me is very much tied to good mental health. And that's tied to a sense of connection to something that is more than just you, but it doesn't have to be, again, defined terms of spirit, because that of course can turn people off. And you have to be in tune with your body, because a body needs rest and comfort, just like you would. People who don't love their bodies, I often talk to them about their animals. And I was like, well, what about your little, puppy and they're like, oh, like, I'm like, when they're laying in the sun, are they worthless? And they're like, no, it's perfect. I'm like, yeah. So a body needs what a body needs. You can't outrun human needs. And I think we all think we can, because as we're trying to outrun the humanity, we're trying to outrun grief. And in the end, psychotherapy and any good depth work helps you face your grief. So because when you finally feel your grief, you free up all kinds of potential. And that's what most of us want. We want to have our potential, but you can't get it by out chasing grief.
I agree. Another thing is that some of the solutions, so-called solutions. So, for example, this obsession with self-improvement and self-care, and these days it's so much the opposite. It's like 20 years ago, there was no awareness about those things, but now since we have tools and we have the internet, it's too much. It's very much human nature, and now all this self-improvement and wellness culture can really easily get out of hand. That is supposed to be for the betterment of our mental health, but it's like all the time, and even on the medical level. With all the science now that the last past decade, that we understand so much about how the body works, and so people are trying to apply all that knowledge to everyday life. For example, I never got, what is it called, the Apple Watch, and
I don't either.
Is that the smart watches that people used to track every move and every step, and wouldn't be good for me, and it's just constantly thinking about, and then people very easily get obsessed with that. And then of course people who do business capitalize on that, because good business idea, let's build something around that. And now there are all these wellness and self-improvement apps even in the digital world. And so what do you think about this?
Self-improvement culture, right? It's its own religion. Religion is dogma, and dogma is not an open heart or an open mind, right? That's my thought. It's trying to outrun death. Most things are trying to outrun death, right? And if you can't accept your death, you won't enjoy your life. I mean, that's like, you have to trust, like, you can use death as why you want to live. So you have a limited time, but if people are trying to outrun death, like with wellness hacks, like there's all these, these like crazy tech bros, or like, hacking away. They're doing anorexia.
Yeah, the biohacking. We have this buzzword, the biohacking.
Yeah, they do behaviors, but they call it biohacking. And I'm like, so you're starving yourself. And to like increase longevity, and this idea of all the money in the world to see if you can live a little bit longer, instead of being like, well, let's just honor that I'm going to die. So if I'm going to die, how do I want to live? Like that, using death as a way to open yourself to say like, well, what really matters to me? Because I am going to die. And that does create natural interest in health. healthy people, healthy health, meaning it's not addiction, is a sense of, because I'm going to die, I don't want to become disabled before I die if I can prevent it, right? So you want to have a shorter death time where it's fast versus 20 years of slowly getting sick, which is what our American culture does with even say obesity. You know, it's going to accelerate your disability before it will kill you, and anything like that is not going to be an enjoyable life. But you don't have to do it with like a such a severe turn that you're trying to biohack and not be a human. So yeah, the self-improvement culture is the same kind of, to me it's all like purity culture. The reason why I think high achievers, and particularly in helping professionals, why I'm really interested in it with my background with eating disorders, you have working culture and social culture saying everything is an emergency. You're not using awareness, and you're not actually having time away from the internet and time to have self reflection. Everything's going to create a pressure model, and then you're going to do the whole keeping up with the Joneses because we're comparison oriented. So you have to have enough of an understanding to say, like, I have to create time and space for myself, and I'm not going to do it from an app, and I'm not going to do it from consumer culture that's telling me I need something. I'm going to have to do it like intentionally take some time. That gives you that intuitive voice of like, what is it that I'm actually here to do? And it is not to be a consumer, and it is not to be a producer. It is to literally be alive. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to produce something that might be effective or have a business, but if that's your primary thing, is just to like, again, keep up with the Jones, have enough money. It's such a stress response, and we know stress creates illness, it creates inflammation, and it will enhance your death. And so in your desire to run away from dying, you're going to actually accelerate dying in a physical, mental way. And so you have to pull out even of self-improvement culture. And you also have to know yourself. Some people do really good with data because they're not as obsessive. And then a lot, again, high achievers lean towards obsessiveness. They use data against themselves. Life is not linear. It's got parts of it that are linear. It's very spiral. And so you have to kind of say, like, how do I lean? What are my strengths? What are my struggles? And what's going to make me worsen that, and what's going to make it better? And so for me, the other thing about leaving healthcare was, I understand that we need to think in like defensive medicine, but defensive medicine actually makes my kind of anxiety-based natural proclivity worse. And so I'm like, yeah, I do better when I'm not in a diagnostic model, because I trust that the people that I like to work with are not so acute that I have to be in a diagnostic model. It doesn't mean I'm very good at assessing and diagnosing, but if I get overly focused, tied to insurance based and blah, 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 I lose the part of me that's really good at serving clients the same thing that I need to serve myself, which is not so obsessive. I needed to hear for myself my whole life, stay in your body, be with your body, love your body, take care of yourself, nurture yourself, enjoy the creativity, because I'm good at accomplishing things. I'm like, this is this, and I'll do that. And then, but it's like, it's not alive. Like, it doesn't feel alive. It just feels rote. And so I'm really here to bring people back into like, feel alive. And again, not from an addiction, because you can also go into like, I feel alive on cocaine. So it's like, not from a drug induced state either, but from like what you can get with nature, creativity, relationships. So you have to be able to play with what do they need help with, because then their achievement will feel grounded instead of performative.
So what are some of the main ways that the coaching is different from therapy?
Coaching, again, in itself is not wrong. We all know that coaches stay in sports teams. There's a goal, there's a vision, and you're helping people tap into their strengths. Therapists do that as well. Like, therapists can always do coaching behaviors, but in my opinion, therapy is healing. And when there's healthy healing, you're moving into thriving. You're not trying to bypass. How I view therapy is, in the modern world, we use it diagnostically, but the origination of therapy is self-exploratory. It's not curative per se from like a problem solution. It's really exploratory. So that's how I like to view therapy. Now, in the modern world, I have to be mindful of that because therapy is regulated. And so that's why I say I do guide work, because I don't necessarily want to work in the regulation of if it's medical or not. But good therapy is exploratory, and there will be a healing, a curative component on a natural timeline, not in a forced timeline, unless someone's in a crisis where you have to actually save their life as the priority, that's more medical versus traditional, right? In therapy, you know that there's an unconscious that is moving, that's bigger than the conscious goal. And you trust that the unconscious has to be revealed, because otherwise someone says, like, I'm a procrastinator, and you help them stop procrastinating, but they hate their lives because they actually were procrastinating because they didn't want to stay in that field, right? So you actually want to get them to the bigger point. In coaching, you're going to keep them on that path, and they may get to their goal, but again, they can still be in a point of like, well, that's not what I really wanted. And so if you're not actually assessing the unconscious, which is what drives most humans more than consciousness, you want to make sure that you're being assessed, like, what do you actually need versus what you say you want? Because generally there's want. You want to help people declare their wants, but you also have to be aware of needs. And there's usually two sides of our mouth that we speak out of as humans.
Yeah, this is a very critical component also of addiction recovery specifically, because a bit, chase the addictive behaviors. That's basically chasing the wants and denying the needs. And I think
Denying the needs.
it's coming back. And this is definitely that most people, at least at some point in their lives, we need help with it, because it's so easy. Like you mentioned, a lot of these drives are unconscious, and it's so to lose touch with that, what really drives it.
If you try to do both and you're really in like a liminal stage, you're going to usually waste your time and money and resources because you're trying to avoid the depth work. So you want to think about, like, am I really ready to make action-oriented approaches, or am I really in a discovery exploratory? Because I tend to think you want to customize. People don't need cookie cutter style of things generally if they're naturally starting to trust in their own inner wisdom. But learning your own inner wisdom helps you then apply like a basic strategy in a unique way that it feels aligned and integrated for you. If it's a business, if it's a relationship. So like, there are all kinds of strategies, but if you're fighting your unconscious, strategies won't work in the way that you need. And you know that with...
Yeah, exactly. I went through that very much myself.
Yeah. That's why addiction has up to 12 times sometimes. You probably know the numbers more than I do, but I think there's like a 10 to 12 times of trying recovery until you're ready. What's the current numbers?
I think it's very individual. I know some people who are, first time realize, very rare. I definitely had more than 20 trials.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, the unconscious has to be, it's almost like you have to feel that pain point to say, I'm really ready to change. Yeah. And you have to hope that, obviously with addiction, you hit it before you die. Same thing with eating disorders. Before death, hopefully. Most of us learn the hard way. And so if you coach people just in, say, a positive psychology model, when they actually need to kind of feel the tough stuff, then you're not doing them a service. But again, all of us are welcome to try different things. I just tend to believe that inner work, customized inner work, will help you get to goals that you actually want in a more integrated and integrity-based way than seeking highs of self-improvement and kind of the culture of everything is attainable. Usually when you have those dark moments of the soul, you realize, like, oh, what I really need is presence. And what I really need is making sure that I'm not being told what is life path, but I'm trusting that I can have my unique life path.
Presence is more important than ever now, in my opinion, because of all the technology and the speed that everything is progressing, and everyone is so whole society is so focused on the future, because it's part of it is fear-based. We don't know what's going to be the where it's going to lead to, and so we focus a lot on that, which is very exciting. It aligns with being visionary, and
it does.
Very interesting, but again, we need a balance. So I want to go back to the last question. I would like to go back a bit to the original topic of burnout, and we spoke about midlife and all the challenges of that. So, do you think that a burnout situation can be prevented in any way? I'm sure you work with younger people. Is there anything you can suggest?
The younger generations, I think, are really interesting right now. And I haven't worked with as much young people in guide work as I have in therapy, but they really saw, they either had boomer parents or Gen X parents who were doing very well. I'm a late Gen X. They all have done very well financially, had different types of things that gave them safety and security. And then this newer generation really grew up with a lot of upheaval. And so what I see with the younger people is they are kind of aware of like everything you're promising doesn't seem that great, which I think is good. Like there's an awareness that everything that's being promised isn't that great. Now, I also worked with the high achievers of that generation, right? So they're still like tied to getting into college, but they were like, even if I get straight A's and I go to college, I may not even get a job. Like they were feeling like, I don't know if there's a promise. So they're kind of feeling an existential sense of like, what is the point? Which I think in some ways is good because that helps you go like, okay, if there's not as much guaranteed success, then I actually do need to kind of think about what I want versus like the cookie cutter approach of like, if you do this, then this and this, then you'll do well. But they are really sad, and I think what they're noticing is that older people are not as connected, that they kind of got into the career path and into the money making. And so they're kind of like, well, sure, that might be nice and we may not have that as much, but they're not very connected. And so I think they're kind of wanting more relationships. And I will say one of the things for my burnout was because I was private practice and I really liked my work, but when I wasn't working, I wasn't interested in networking. Like I was not a networker. So I didn't have as many colleagues as I did when I would work at an office where there was like 5 of us, right? And so I think I got a little lonely actually because one of my human interaction was as a caretaker, not as a equal. Not that I wasn't equal as a human, but I was providing a service. And then it was like with my friends, and all of us were in helping professions. And so there was a little bit of not having enough of the community part that's not about the career. And part of me deciding to kind of work in helping professions where I met you was this idea of, okay, where is the community of people that are aligned? So I want people to be in an open-hearted space so that they can handle the open-minded. Because I think if it's open-minded, it gets a little us and them at times, right? Like it's there's so much discord right now with like liberal and conservative. So I think this younger generation, they're seeing community, and I do think we have to be in healthy community. And if we're givers or helpers, sometimes we're used to taking the lead. And so it's really important, I think, at times to be able to be in a space where you're not taking the lead. So one of the things that helped me the best was I did join a creative community where I was just a person, not the person leading it. And that was so good for me to not feel like I had to be in charge, because again, you're trying to use your strengths. So I like to lead things. And I was like, I need to not lead things. I need to be where I'm just a member instead of, right? So I think part of it is having a healthy enough humility that though you might be strong at leading, that you're actually letting yourself be led. Not attaching all of your worth and value to your career is really important with burnout. Same thing with moms. Like, so people who are moms that get burned out sometimes with caretaking, or if you're a caretaker, if your overarching identity is the mom or the career that's a caretaker, you can feel almost like a struggle of I'm letting people down. And so it's really important that you don't see yourself just as doing for people, because you have to have that whole concept of putting on the oxygen mask first for a reason. And so if your value is tied up in providing something for others, it's really important. But all careers, we all have to remember our careers, again, our culture has really assigned worth and value and purpose in careers. And it's not that you shouldn't have that. It's fine. But if it's too tied into it, it takes away your humanity, and you're not your career. You're not, even though calling might be really strong, it's not who you are. When I say the soul call is very much a unique, individualistic who are you, and your career might be part of your soul call, but it might not be. You don't have to make it fluid. And so we all have in my opinion, we all have a purpose in this world. It's great if you can make it part of your career, but it doesn't have to be. right? And I think we've tended to kind of really idealize that, and I think it's really important that we let that go.
Yeah, and part of that, the so-called that you mentioned, the creativity, what I really like about creativity is that, so we don't need, many people still think that we have to find one thing, the one
Yeah.
thing that is our call. That's really, I think, probably we realize sooner or later that's not necessarily true because we lose interest for many reasons. So
Yeah.
life, human life is we'll have long enough life to try different things. And so it's again what you mentioned about attachment and to get
Yeah.
attached. And the role of community and the environment, I like to say, I like to think about environment, a larger environment, because, as a therapist, in therapy, very often we investigate the early childhood environment that contributed to the
Mhm.
development of the
Yeah.
problems we are facing now. And then we can use our current environment. We are very responsive to environment. So that was
Yes,
one of
exactly.
main things that I studied as a neuroscientist, how
Uh-huh.
the environment can affect us on a biological level, the different mechanisms. And we have so much knowledge about that now that we can plan a lot of those things consciously.
Humans repeat, it's called repetition compulsion,
Yeah.
until we master things. And so sometimes if you grew up in a rigid environment or a restrictive environment, you're going to keep on putting yourself in those, right? So that is why, there's this thing called exposure therapy. If you're really used to being like healthcare, to me is somewhat of an restrictive environment because again, of that safety-based model, like you don't have to leave healthcare, but you're like, okay, it's very restrictive. It's very kind of like it's traditional in certain things. So am I exposing myself outside of that to other things that are not as restrictive? So travel is really good. Nature is huge for us. Watching nature, learning to watch nature and trust that a tree grows and it drops leaves and like you can count on nature to be like you are nature, right? You are just like a tree. You are part of nature. So like I'm here to grow and I'm here to shed. Like I'm not here just to hold it all in. I think too attachment has like a bad rap if you are really have strong like interests. Like I remember being like when I first learned about attachment, I was like, I like being attached to my things because I was like, I'm not gonna let go of things that really mean something to me. But healthy holding on, like soft hand versus gripping. And I think for me with my burnout, I was gripping into what I thought
Yeah.
because it was like, but I like this and I don't want it to change. And so I'm really good at like being stubborn and thinking that I have to let go of everything instead of being like, okay, I need to let go of this, but a healthy holding on, soft hand of like, my values are what I hold on to, but the environment of itself or the mechanism doesn't have to be the same. And learning your values is really important and making sure they're your values, not just societal values or from your family of origin or contrasted because your family of origin was one way, you're going to be doing the opposite just to prove a point, right? Which is often what we do too.
Balance is the key word for everything in life, mostly, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and one note on that, what you mentioned about nature, there have been studies that even simply the color green, even just looking at the color green, even if it's a virtual, even if it's on a computer screen, can provide some of the benefits of being in nature. That's just, I think it's
Yeah.
a beautiful example of biological conditioning that
Yeah.
nature and the plants are green, and so even we respond to even the color, even if it's fake. And so
Yeah. I know.
we can now with all this knowledge we can consciously integrate all these different things. We don't necessarily need really dramatic like
And
dark.
nature is literally outside your window, no matter where you live. There's usually a tree. If you're even in, you live in New York, right? We know nature is good for physical health and calmness. And so generally finding your relationship to nature, even if you're like, as a kid, I used to be like, I don't want to be outside. Like I was little, I was like, I like to watch TV. But I loved where I grew up. If I think about it, like I had, a lot of land. And so when I think about what feels like home, and again, home can, sometimes that's not good for people, but for me, this like wide expanse of fields and trees feels very much part of my concept of home, right? And so Mother Earth, right, our home there is feeling your feet on the ground. We know when you garden, you get actually the chemicals in the soil. It has an antidepressant effect. So even caring for plants in your own house, caring for your animal, you're with something that is nature. And then your own, like putting your hand on your chest when you feel a little bit distressed and feeling the power of your heartbeat. Like you have some things that you don't have to control. Like it just does it for you.
Last question is, thank you very much for
Yeah.
this. Can people reach you and contact you in any way? And how can people learn more about you?
My website's thefocusedpath.com, and you'll have the link for that.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description.
Yeah, I have a social media. I tend to, though I might be posting, it's better for people to email me versus try to get it on social media. To me, social media.
Very healthy, very good choice. Yeah.
Yeah, like I use it. I have a team
that.
that just like I might write things and they post it, but I'm not on. So I'm a big believer of not being online all the time.
Yeah.
But I know we have online businesses, so it's better. Usually, you can follow me on it, but to actually meet me would be shoot me an email, go to my website. I have a Substack called The Unnameable Undertaking about kind of that in between stage of really when you can't. In psychotherapy, we talk about name it to tame it. When you're having a hard time to name it, I call it the unnameable undertaking, and just that part, it's that really that transitional space and how that helps. So there's different ways that people can find me. You'll have the links, and I love to support women who are really in a space of needing women entrepreneurs, helping professionals who are kind of they're in a sacred pause. They need a sacred pause, so that you're not just wasting time and energy to kind of like grow the next thing, but really trusting that you, especially if you've created a lot of accomplishment, you have the resources and time to slow down. And we often get scared we're going to run out of time. But when you really learn how to become present, you will actually be able to speed up in an effective manner versus that performative, productive culture. And so it's really like learning how to turn into yourself. And I think most of us need a private space where they can really be held in a way that is different than the model of like sharing all your laundry when you're not ready, which I think sometimes the social media culture says like, okay, just share it all. If you lean towards perfectionism and professionalism, you do not want to share it all until you're really ready to, in your nervous system, talk about the things that were once very scary to talk about.